Okay, so you want to own a theme park. Buy some land, build a few roller coasters, and watch families line up every summer to hand you their money. Kids screaming on the drop tower, the smell of funnel cake in the air, a parking lot packed from open to close. That's the picture in your head. Here's the problem: a theme park is not really in the business of selling roller coaster rides. It is in the business of selling you 8 hours inside a gate and everything you end up paying for during those 8 hours that you never planned on paying for. And once you understand that difference, everything about how a theme park actually makes money starts to make sense. Let's start with the fact that there isn't just one kind of theme park. There are several, and each one is a completely different business wearing the same roller coaster. At the very bottom, you have the small local park, the kind that costs somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 to get running, a handful of kiddie rides and a snack stand built for a single town. Above that sits the Family Entertainment Center, an indoor, all-weather operation built around arcades and laser tag rather than outdoor rides, cheap to open compared to anything with a roller coaster in it, and one of the fastest growing segments in the entire industry because it runs 12 months a year instead of just one season. Above that, the regional park, the Cedar Point or Six Flags style operation, built from scratch for somewhere between $200 million and $500 million. And at the very top, the mega resort, the Disney and Universal category, where a single project can run past $1 billion before you've sold a single ticket. Each of these is a different bet on the same underlying question. Do you make your money from a huge number of people paying a little, or a smaller number of people paying a lot and staying longer? That single decision shapes every other number in the business. Now, here's where the naive mental model starts to break down. You think the expensive part is the roller coasters. It isn't. The expensive part is the land and the infrastructure underneath everything. The site work, the utilities, the parking, before a single steel track goes into the ground. When Universal built Epic Universe in Orlando, which opened in May of 2026, the investment ran to $7 billion, described by Comcast's own CEO as the largest single investment the company has ever made in the parks business. Disney has committed $60 billion total to its parks and experiences division, with $30 billion of that earmarked specifically for its domestic parks. And this isn't new. The original Disneyland cost $17 million in 1955. Walt Disney World cost $400 million to open in 1971. Shanghai Disneyland cost $5.5 billion in 2016. The number keeps climbing because the land and the infrastructure keep climbing, and the actual rides, the part everyone assumes is the expensive part, are almost an afterthought by comparison. A single signature roller coaster might cost anywhere from a few million to tens of millions of dollars, and then it needs somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million a year in maintenance, depending on how complex it is. For as long as it keeps spinning, here's the part almost nobody budgets for correctly. Liability insurance. A small local operation might pay somewhere between $1,000 and $5,000 a year. A mid-size regional park is looking at $25,000 to $150,000 a year. A large theme park can pay anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 a year or more, and the industry rule of thumb runs somewhere around $300 to $800 in premium for every $1 million of coverage you carry. And insurers watch one thing especially closely in this business: seasonal payroll. A theme park doesn't hire its staff evenly across the year. It hires an army of seasonal workers for a handful of months and lays almost all of them off when the season ends. And that hiring spike is exactly the kind of financial exposure that makes an insurance underwriter nervous. According to Six Flags' own financial filings, roughly 70% of the company's entire annual attendance and revenue happens in just the second and third quarters of the year, from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Everything in the business earns for the next 9 months has to be built almost entirely inside a 3-month window. So how does a park actually make its money once the gates are open? Picture the ticket price as the cover charge, not the meal. According to Six Flags' most recent full-year results, the average guest now spends $61.60 inside the park, on top of whatever they already paid to get in, and that number climbed 3% in a single year. Where does that money go? Food and beverage. The cost of goods sold on park food typically runs around 50% of what it sells for, sometimes climbing as high as 60%, which still leaves a healthy contribution margin before you even get to labor. General food items usually carry a markup of 20 to 50% over what the same item would cost at a normal restaurant, but drinks are where it gets almost absurd. A fountain soda that costs the park less than 30 cents to pour can sell for $6, a markup north of 500%. Bottled water, the single most profitable item in most parks, can carry a markup as high as 4,000%. The rides get you through the gate, the thirst does the rest. Here's the part of this business that almost nobody outside of it understands, and it changes how you should think about the price tag on a roller coaster. For accounting purposes, according to filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, ride and game equipment at these companies is typically depreciated over just 4 to 12 years, but a well-maintained steel coaster can physically run for 15 to 30 years or more, which means on the company's books, that multi-million-dollar ride gets written down to almost nothing years before it stops earning a single dollar. Every ticket it sells after that point is on paper pure profit flowing straight through, because the asset that earned it was already declared worthless. The public sees a beloved old coaster still running after decades. The accountant sees a fully paid off cash machine, and then there's the queue itself, which turned out to be one of the most quietly profitable inventions in the entire industry. Disney now sells a product called Lightning Lane, letting you skip the regular line priced anywhere from $16 to $22 a day on the low end, all the way up to somewhere between $129 and $449 a day for the premium version that unlocks priority access to nearly every ride in the park. Analysts at Goldman Sachs estimated that selling just 1 million of the premium passes could add over $200 million in additional revenue in a single year. Here's the part that isn't just about squeezing more money out of you. When the price on that pass climbs during the busiest hours of the busiest days, it isn't only about maximizing revenue. It's a pressure valve. Raising the price during peak time pushes some guests toward quieter hours, spreading out the crowd, and it makes the regular free line feel like a bargain by comparison, even though nothing about the regular line actually improved. There's a piece of this revenue engine that has nothing to do with what happens inside the gate at all. Intellectual property. When Universal built Epic Universe around franchises like Harry Potter, Super Nintendo World, and How to Train Your Dragon, it wasn't just building rides. It was building three-dimensional advertising for merchandise, streaming subscriptions, and box office releases that live far outside the park's fence line. A stuffed character or a prop replica sells inside the gift shop at a markup that rivals the soda fountain, but the real value is circular. The movie sells the park sells the merchandise, and the merchandise reminds you to go watch the next movie. This is also exactly why regional and independent parks, the ones without a media conglomerate standing behind them, can't compete on this axis. No matter how good their roller coasters are, they can sell you a funnel cake. They cannot sell you a movie franchise. And for the mega resorts, there's a fourth stream stacked on top of tickets, food, and merchandise. The hotel room itself. Disney and Universal both build multi-night resort hotels directly on property, and the logic is simple. A guest staying inside the resort spends more nights inside the gates, wakes up already on site instead of driving in from a cheaper hotel across town, and books park tickets as part of the same transaction as the room. Universal built entire hotel towers as part of the Epic Universe expansion specifically to capture guests for the full length of a multi-day trip instead of a single afternoon. Once you're staying on property, every dollar of your vacation, not just your ticket, has a chance of landing in the same company's accounts. Now let's talk about what happens when this business goes wrong, because it can go wrong in ways that have nothing to do with how many people show up. And it doesn't always go wrong the same way. In the 1980s, a park in Vernon, New Jersey called Action Park became infamous for exactly the opposite of careful engineering. Over roughly 2 decades, at least 6 people died on its rides, including a 19-year-old on the Alpine Slide in 1980, and 2 more visitors within a single year in 1982. One wave pool built with currents strong enough to overwhelm the lifeguards on duty earned the nickname the Grave Pool among locals. A looping water slide called the Cannonball Loop was so dangerous it stayed closed most of the time it existed. The park's founder, facing an overwhelming volume of lawsuits, created his own insurance company that wasn't properly licensed to operate, a scheme that eventually led to over 100 counts of insurance fraud. The parent company filed for bankruptcy in 1996, and the park closed that same year, only reopening 2 years later under new ownership, completely redesigned as what is today Mountain Creek Water Park. Action Park didn't fail because people stopped wanting water slides. It failed because the safety and legal structure underneath the rides gave way. And once that structure breaks, the crowds in the parking lot mean nothing. Sometimes the park does nothing wrong at all, and the ground gives out under it anyway. In the year 2000, a park called Jazzland opened outside New Orleans after roughly 18 months of construction. The original operator ran into financial trouble, and Six Flags took over the lease in 2002, spending more than $20 million to relaunch it in 2003 as Six Flags New Orleans. 2 years later, Hurricane Katrina hit the city on August 29, 2005, and the park sat in floodwater for weeks. Estimates range from 4 to 12 feet deep across the property. By the time the water receded, roughly 80% of the park's rides and support structures were unusable. Six Flags declared it a total insurance loss and offered the city $10 million to walk away early from a 75-year lease it had signed on the land. What followed wasn't a quick decision. It was a legal fight that dragged on for years, tangled up inside Six Flags' own corporate bankruptcy at the time. The case was finally settled in bankruptcy court, with Six Flags agreeing to pay the city $3 million in cash, plus 25% of any Katrina insurance payout above $65 million, closing the matter for good. Nobody rebuilt the park. It sat exactly as the floodwater left it for almost 20 years, rusting roller coasters standing in waist-high grass, becoming one of the most photographed abandoned places in America. The city didn't even start clearing the site until 2024, approving $5 million just to remove 2 decades of overgrowth before actual demolition could begin that same year. A theme park doesn't need bad management to die. Sometimes it just needs one very bad afternoon, and a lease that nobody can agree how to end. That's not the only way this industry punishes a bad structure. Six Flags as a corporation, not any single park, filed for bankruptcy in June of 2009, carrying $2.4 billion in debt against $3 billion in assets, the result of more than a decade of aggressively leveraged acquisitions. Its individual parks were still running fine that year. The company simply owed more than it could carry. And more recently, Wild Waves in Washington State announced it would permanently close after its 2026 season, nearly 50 years after opening, citing rising operating costs in the years since the pandemic that had turned the business into a persistent financial loss, even as families kept showing up every summer. 4 different parks, 4 completely different causes of death: negligence, a hurricane, and a lease nobody could settle, corporate debt, and the slow grind of rising costs. Not one of them died because people stopped wanting to ride roller coasters. The gate can be busy and the business can still be dying underneath it. So what does a good year actually look like against a bad one? In its most recent full fiscal year, following its merger, Six Flags Entertainment reported total revenue of $2.7 billion, alongside that $61.60 per capita spending figure climbing 3%. A quarter earlier, under its previous ownership structure, the legacy Cedar Fair company posted a record quarter of $572 million in revenue, up 14%, with attendance up 17% to 8.6 million guests, a genuinely strong season by every measure. Vibe. Compare that to United Parks and Resorts, the company that owns SeaWorld, which reported $1.73 billion in revenue for its most recent fiscal year, down slightly, with attendance down as well. A decline the company directly attributed to a string of hurricanes that alone were estimated to have cost the business over 400,000 visitors that year. Strip out the storms, and attendance would have grown instead of shrinking. Same industry, same basic business model, two very different years, and the difference wasn't the rides. It was weather, debt, and structure. Three things that have nothing to do with how good the roller coaster actually is. So if you do decide to build a theme park, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you succeed. It was never really about how many roller coasters you could fit on the property. The roller coaster was never the product. It was the reason you walked through the gate in the first place and stayed long enough to spend $61 you never planned on spending.